Have you ever played Simon Stays? On an August afternoon in 2008, Richie Hall asked that benign question. Sitting atop a hill, I twisted my head away from the spectacular view of our town below and lifted an inquisitive eyebrow at my friend. We were only 10 years old, and my initial thought was that Richie had misspoken. "Don't you mean Simon Says?" I asked. Richie shook his head. "Simon Stays." "No," I answered. "I've never played that." Daniel told me about it," Richie continued. "He said it's only for adults." "Ew, this isn't going to be like the time that..." "No, it's not porn, Amber," Richie interrupted. You know, I still have nightmares of those two girls, and it's not porn," Richie adamantly reiterated. "It's a game for adults. Are you an adult, Amber?" I frowned. "No, Richie, and neither are you. But I'm old enough to know that urban legends are dumb." Richie huffed. "You're worse than Daniel. Don't you want to prove that we're as brave as that smug idiot?" "I just know that anything he suggested must be either dangerous or disgusting. Usually both," I said. Why don't I show you how it works before you decide whether you want to play?" Richie suggested. He had a feverish look in his eyes. I'd seen it countless times. My best friend was wonderful in so many ways, but the boy always had something to prove, and that often hampered his rationality. Something which became all too clear to me when my dear friend began to speak in tongues. I have no idea what Richie said, but I wouldn't dare to repeat it. Some of you may have reckless ideas. Anyway, after several minutes of chanting that chilled my flesh, Richie stopped and looked at me. "So, do you want to play?" he asked. I gulped and nodded. I'm not sure why. Curiosity or hypnosis. Take your pick. Something drove me to join Richie on his hellish quest. "Good. Firstly, we choose a place to seek him. He should be listening." Richie giggled. "Simon stays in the graveyard." The town church sat at the foot of the hill. My friend leapt to his feet, pointing at the steeple which loomed above the overgrown graveyard. As he started to stomp down the hill, my entire body tightened. "I don't want to do this, Richie," I said. "Graveyards aren't scary," my friend assured me. "You don't need to be afraid." "You know why I don't want to go down there," I replied. It was where my mother was buried, and when Richie remembered that, he hung his head in shame. "Listen, Amber, Simon Stays... how do I put this? It's more than a game. If we find him, Simon will answer any and all questions. Come with me, and you can finally find peace," Richie said, stretching a hand towards me. "We should ask him about your mother." "Don't, Richie. Don't say that." "Who is Simon?" I whispered. "Let's find out," he smiled. Eyeing the setting sun, which fell from a reddening sky, I held my friend's hand and descended the hill towards our sleepy town. In the decaying light, the graveyard became more than a sea of headstones. It was a shadowy chasm in the earth, a gateway to hell itself. I blindly followed Richie through the gate into that darkened graveyard, because I'd always loved him. Or maybe 10-year-olds simply have a natural tendency to act foolishly. Whatever the case, I squeezed Richie's hand tightly as we wandered and weaved through the headstones. "What are we hoping to find?" I shakily asked. There came a wheeze from a nearby gravestone. In horror, I turned my head, but there was nothing to be seen. And then Richie's hand slipped out of mine. When I twisted to face him, he was sprinting into the night. "Richie?" I called after him. "Don't leave me here." "Don't you hear Simon?" Richie cried joyously. "He's going to answer my questions." I lost sight of my friend behind some gravestones, and I ran after him with trembling legs. The black graveyard had already terrified me, but it plunged to a new level of horror once I was alone. I shrieked Richie's name until my throat went dry. He'd vanished from sight, and every part of my body was screeching at me to go home. I knew my father would be worrying. Then I heard a sound. A hummed tune. It sounded vaguely like a dissonant version of a children's lullaby, and that only unsettled me more deeply. When Richie finally emerged from the shadows, I screamed. My friend's skin had withered, and he had inexplicably aged. He looked older than any living human, hundreds of years old, as if he had spent centuries learning terrible truths from Simon. This impossibility had robbed Richie of his humanity, and the decrepit figure filled me with terror beyond comprehension. What happened to you?" I asked. Richie offered a yellow, toothy grin. "Simon answers all questions, but everyone stays. And you'll stay, Amber, when he's answered your questions." I don't want answers," I whimpered, backing away from the abomination that used to be my friend. As the moonlight caught his face, I started to notice the full extent of Richie's dreadful features. His pupils were black saucers that spanned most of his eyes. It was a black fullness, not emptiness. Eyes of knowledge. Too much knowledge. "No, Amber, you're already playing the game," Richie giggled. "Simon must answer your question. And when he does, you must stay here forever. For his knowledge is too great to fall upon the ears of those outside our little game. It's a secret, Amber. You know how to keep a secret, don't you?" I darted away as fast as my legs would carry me. I heard a howl from the inhuman Richie, and he scurried after me. I didn't turn around to verify that. I trusted my ears. The graveyard gate was in sight, but Simon had transformed my friend into an unstoppable machine. He was hot on my heels. I only had one shot at freedom, and it was based on an unsubstantiated hunch. Richie was trapped in the graveyard. When that green, rusting gate opened and closed behind me, I turned and breathed a sigh of relief. Richie did not pursue me. I eyed the subhuman monstrosity that used to be my dearest friend. It didn't cross the boundaries of the graveyard, but the gaze from its egregious face was enough to haunt me. I winced, bracing for a bony hand to slither over the gate and seize me by the neck. Instead, Richie, or the thing that used to be Richie, spun around and fled. To this day, nobody has located my missing childhood friend. Only I know the truth. Richie stays in the graveyard.